happy to welcome everyone today. Thank you for joining this special program entitled The Fourth Quarter, the Blueprint for a Bottom-Up Constitutional Movement in Israel. I'm Rebecca Goldberg, Executive Director of the Helen Diller Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies. A bit about the Helen Diller Institute. Through its two programs, one on Jewish law and one on Israel Studies, the Helen Diller Institute provides a rich academic forum for students and faculty to explore the breadth and complexity of Israel and contemporary topics. Currently, the Institute houses an undergraduate fellowship of nearly 40 students, brings visiting faculty from Israeli and U.S. universities to teach and research at Berkeley, and hosts the university's undergraduate minor in Israel Studies, and offers dozens of lectures and programs to the public and campus communities. So I'm happy to welcome Professor Ronen Avraham, who just arrived as the distinguished lecturer. Sorry, we don't know your official title, but there is an official title for you here, to teach a short course on insurance law, on insurance risk at Berkeley Law. He is professor of law at Tel Aviv University's Buckman Faculty of Law, and he directs the Segla Center for Interdisciplinary Research of the Law and is editor-in-chief of Theoretical Inquiries in Law. Professor Avraham obtained his LLM and JSD from Michigan Law School after receiving his LLB and MBA from Ilan University. Professor Avraham's primary research interests are in economic analysis of torts and healthcare law and the intersection of liability reform and healthcare reform. He is also one of the leaders of the Fourth Quarter, the largest grassroots movement in Israel, which you will be learning more about today. I'm also excited that Professor Ayal will moderate the conversation with Professor Avraham. He is the Spring 2025 Helen Diller Institute visiting professor, and he is also a professor of law and economics at Bar-Ilan University. Ayal holds dual PhDs, one in economics from UC Berkeley and one in law from Ilan University. He specializes in corporate and competition law and applying game theory to legal and business contexts. He is the author of Fairness and Antitrust, Protecting the Strong from the Weak, a seminal work in the field. And beyond academia, Professor Ayal serves as a sought-after economic consultant and court-appointed expert. So please join me in welcoming our speaker and our moderator today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank all of you for being here. I hope my part in this will be short. My job is to make sure that Ronen has a hard time presenting his and to make it interesting for us. And what we'll do is we'll have a little bit of a back and forth conversation. We'll let Ronen introduce the important work that he does or that they do in Israel and discuss a little bit about the background for that. And afterwards, we're going to open up the floor for questions. So anything that you would like to ask, comment on, etc., there'll be time for that after our initial presentation and discussion of these issues. So if you have something, feel free afterwards to raise your hand and we'll try to let as many people as possible participate in the conversation. So all introductions were made. I don't need to do anything. What I would like to do is if you could introduce, I think most people, at least in the room, have heard something of the legal reform, legal overhaul in Israel, and very strong opinions and feelings on both sides of the debate. If you could give a little bit of the background about how this affected society, and then later on we can move into what the Fourth Quarter is and how you guys are trying to do something about it. That would be great.
Thank you very much, Adi, and thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me, and thank you, everyone, for coming. It's kind of interesting that two scholars interested in law and economics discuss constitutional crises. I think actually there's might be a reason behind it for the Q&A. About 2 years ago, Israel went into a constitutional crisis. When I scheduled this talk, that was before President Trump was elected, if I remember correctly. And usually things that happen in the United States happen 20 years later in Israel. I think this time it's the opposite. We guys preempted you by 2 years, and it seems that you guys are going through something very similar to what we went through 2 years ago, only on a much larger scale because everything is bigger in America. But I think there are a lot of parallels and similarities, and I'll let you think about those parallels and similarities yourself. So about 2 years ago, louder, sorry. About 2 years ago, January 2023, Minister of Justice Levine introduced what he called a legal reform, what the protesters called the judiciary coup, or the legal coup. And that was basically a list of very long list of changes to the legal regime as we knew it in Israel. And the shock was very strong within the Israeli society. And within no time, protests started. I remember coming to the first protest in January in Tel Aviv. We were a few hundred people there, mainly law students and law professors that immediately understood what the meaning was for the Israeli democracy. And then exponential growth every week. There were more and more and more. Eventually, it's estimated that about 2 million people were engaged in protesting every Saturday night against the legal reform. It was, you can see here a picture of that. It was, I like many other law professors, I used to go on Saturday nights and talk to the crowd. I can tell you that it's a very different experience than to talk in class. Talk in class, you're hoping that students will remain awake, but when you talk to a crowd of 10,000 people, they're chanting, they're cheering, they're repeating what you say. It's an electrifying experience. It's almost addictive. And just a kind of a spoiler, it was not easy to stop doing it and find a different way for myself and also I think for the country. There's something really addictive about going every Saturday and having thousands of people cheering to whatever you say, whether they totally get it or not. It was very ceremonial. There were kind of known chants that everybody repeated, and you kind of shouted out to the crowd, and everybody shouted back, and these were good times. But I'm not sure how effective they were. But we'll talk about that. So fast forwards, and then at some point, negotiations started at the president's mention between the coalition and the opposition. And those talks failed, and eventually the government was able to pass. Israel is a parliamentary system, so the government controls the parliament, the Knesset. So when I say the government passed, it's really the Knesset passed, but it's only formally the Knesset passed. The government passed an amendment to a basic law, which is similar, not similar to a constitutional amendment, and they basically took away from the Supreme Court the power to review government's action under the reasonableness doctrine. In Israel, the Supreme Court could review government's action, and if they're extremely unreasonable, the Supreme Court could strike them down. I know here, those of you that are law students, that sounds pretty amazing. Actually, it is pretty amazing. It is pretty amazing. But it's a different system, and we won't go into the details. We were sliding into a violent civil war. Another similarity between the US and Israel is that we both have memories of a civil war. Here it's about less than 200 years ago. In our case, it's a little bit less than 2,000 years ago. But it's still very vivid. People fast every year in Israel, remembering that civil war from 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years ago. So we were in a non-violent civil war sliding into potentially violent civil war. And then came October 7th. And Hamas attacked Israel, as you all know. And that basically stopped us from deteriorating into a violent civil war. But now, as the war hopefully is ending, we see again a lot of tension within the Israeli society. So this is basically the timeline. Let me just say maybe one more word about the role of law professors. I was not unique. Most law professors in Israel participated heavily in the protest, either giving, speaking in events, webinars, writing policy papers, participating in the Knesset, organizing grassroots groups. I mean, we worked in that 24/7. So that's basically the
Good. So I want to frame what we are going to be talking about and what we're not going to be talking about. Ronen and I discussed this before, and we really do not want to go too much into the details of the laws that were proposed and the changes to the legal regime, given that a lot of people here might not be experts on Israeli constitutional law for some reason. So we're going to glance over those. What I would like to talk more about is how these things affected Israeli society and what, aside from the political divide, what is happening in groups of Israeli civil society who rise up to try to do something about this. Now, one thing should be clear, there are many groups and there are many opinions. And as a backdrop for what Ronen will be talking about in the fourth quarter group, whatever you say, any manner in which you speak about these changes tells a lot about who you are and how you approach it. So what I would like to hear more about is, first of all, the transition from being on the side of a protester to on the side of seeking compromise. Who, when you're trying to build this compromise, who is with you, at least in seeking compromise, not about the different opinions, but who are partners in seeking compromise, and what are the social forces that you're operating against that are saying even seeking compromise is really bad because you're legitimizing the other side or creating more of a problem on the legal front.
Okay, there's a lot out there. So I started to have doubts after the Knesset passed the unreasonableness amendment. I thought that, wow, given the list of 20 things that the government wanted to pass, passing just this one, let's give them this victory. It's not a big deal. It's a doctrine that the court has developed 40 years ago. There are other doctrines that enable judicial review of government action. Even without the unreasonableness doctrine, I thought the Supreme Court could still review government action, and they were also starting to develop new administrative law doctrines like good faith. If they believe that, again, I know for you it will sound amazing, it is amazing, but if the Supreme Court believes that the government acted in bad faith, they can strike it down. So there are many tools for judicial review of government action. I thought, you know what, let's end it. Let's give them, the other side, the government, this victory and finish the civil war. The non-violent civil war we were engaged in. And then I noticed that in my camp, there was not even there was no willingness to do even that. We will give them no victory no matter what, no concession, because all sorts of arguments like slippery slope and you normalize the beast and whatnot. And at that point, I thought that I want to try and see if there are people in the other camp that are willing to make some compromises. And a student of mine in one of my seminars, it was a Jewish Arab seminar. Well, I like to talk to people from other camps in many contexts. So I have a seminar in Tel Aviv University that tries to see how Jews and Arabs can live together in Israel. And one of the Jewish students there, I can't remember what the exact context was, but there were like students' presentations about compromises, and she presented the fourth quarter. Fourth quarter is a grassroots movement that was formed like 3 years ago before Justice Levine, the Minister of Justice, reform, but it's a group of 4 people that thought Israel is going down a very dangerous road. By the way, the term fourth quarter is because if you look at Israel history, but not just Israel history, many nations' history, within 100 years, the fourth quarter is, year 75 and above, civil war happened. It's true, by the way, in this country as well, right? Think about 1865, go back 75 years, see what happened then. But it's true about David and Solomon's kingdom 3,000 years ago. It's true about the Hashmonites' kingdom 2,200 years ago. And the free was that it's going to be true about Israel as well. When they asked the founding father of the Israel country, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, asked him 10 or 20 years after it was formed, so are you happy with Israel? He said, don't ask me now, ask me when he's 75 years old, then we'll know. He didn't make it. But so that's the origin, fourth quarter, how to avoid a civil war. And this student told me about that. She told me that she's active there, and I got interested. And what they did back then, I think it's only a year ago, was to bring people to living rooms together, people like 20 people meeting somebody's living room, and they're secular and religious, left and right, settlers and citizens of Tel Aviv, and just talk in a kind of a structured conversation. And what we discover is that the older people here might not be surprised, maybe the younger people will be more surprised, that we discover that the other camp, when you spend most of the time on social media, the algorithm, the monetary incentive is to put you in an echo chamber where you hear you confront a lot of anger and think that the extreme people on the other extreme say, but those people represent the extreme. They don't represent most of the people on the other side. In the fourth quarter, we say that 80% of the people could agree on 80% of the stuff, 80% of the time. I think it's true. So for the first time in my life, and I'm not that young, I sat with a settler. Otherwise, I would have refused to meet them. I sat with a settler, and we had discussions about visions for Israel, and I saw that, wow, we're not that different.
I remember asking the settler, would you have any problem with having an Arab prime minister? And I thought I knew the answer, and he looked at me and said, that's condescending. I said, why? I said, do you think I'm racist? Do you think I have any problem with an Arab being prime minister? And frankly, yes, that's what I thought he would say, but he didn't say that. So you start meeting real people from the other side, and you see that they're not enemies. They're people as good as you are, only with different vision about Israel, different conception of the good, and they're willing to compromise on their dreams, just as I am willing to compromise on my dreams, so that we can survive together. And back then, when I thought about survivorship, I didn't think about the Hamas attacking Israel, with Iran, with Hezbollah, with Syria. I didn't think about 7 countries attacking us. I thought just about, civil war. I was worried about that. But given the neighborhood, there's also a reason to stay together, not just because of the internal threat, but also for the external threat. So I got more and more involved, and at some point I told that student, it was, again, a year ago, second semester of last year, I told her, look, you convinced me that we have to stop the government, which is very extreme, shock and awe, trying to have radical changes very fast. We should fight them, we should continue demonstrating, but at the same time, we should give a hand to real people on the other side and see how we could build stuff together. So I told her, I'm your soldier. This is Israel, so I'm already a soldier. I told her, I'm your soldier, tell me what to do. And she didn't come back to me, but then a month or two later, she sends me WhatsApp. In Israel, students have fastest WhatsApp. I know it's weird, but this is how we work there. And she sends me a WhatsApp, and she says, look, there is a team that is now, we built a team to think about the constitutional crisis. You want to be involved? I said, yeah, sure. And lo and behold, I found myself in a team of 4, diverse team of 4. I'm kind of the secular, liberal, lefty. There was religious, right-wing, um, guy, and then was a woman. She's called herself traditional Masorti. So we're kind of on the spectrum. And was another woman who was she basically was our boss. She's an employee of the fourth quarter. She organized everything, and we started a journey. We met with maybe 50 different people and think tanks, professors, former attorney generals, former justices, former everything, from the very right wing think tank of Kohelet, if you know, to the very left wing, the Institute for Israeli Thought or something like that, and many think tanks in the middle. And it was a journey, and we met with a lot of people, and we ended up writing a 45 pages document. And maybe I'll stop here.
Sure. No, I thought you'll tell everyone all 45 pages and we'll test them on it afterwards. No, but what I would like, first of all, it resonates a lot with the experience that I had. I teach at a different law school, and in my law school, it's more oriented towards the religious right, traditionally. And I was
a student in that law school.
Yeah, well, I apologize.
Just like, I don't know if you know the fact, but Yigal Amir, who assassinated Prime Minister Rabin in 1995, was a classmate of mine.
Oh,
Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I thought he was a student at Bar Ilan Law School, at which I teach, a very famous student, and he caused actually, sorry?
Infamous.
In Wallace, yeah.
It depends who you ask. Again, the whole topic of our conversation is how different people describe the same thing.
Was he a student? Was he a good student? No, he was engaged in, political activism, too much of it, obviously. No, he was not a good student, but maybe people ask you, could you guess that he's going to murder the president? I could not guess that.
Okay, it's interesting you bring that up, because that's another period of civil strife in Israel, and people looking at others through the lens of, are you of my group or are you of the other group? And what we saw with the murder of Rabin is how bad and how quickly it could go that way, and at the same time, how an extreme event could cause people to kind of wake up from the tribalism, from fighting against each other, to say there is something we have in common which is more important than our group identity, without giving up on group identity. And that's what I'd like to kind of pivot ourselves towards, because there are also a lot of parallel ways of looking at it, how these things operate in other countries, including in the US, where a lot of people feel that they're in a time not just of groups that are fighting over very basic things, the infrastructure of how we view our life and how the legal system is operating, but also the question of how do I cooperate with someone who is so far away from my opinion and so difficult to talk with. And on my faculty, when this happened, legal reform, I have two of the law professors on my faculty who were very much in support of it and were quoted by the politicians, and two of my faculty who were among the leaders of the group of law professors protecting democracy, etc. And I tried to bring them together and to create some forum in which we'll have different people of different opinions who are experts in the field. All of these are constitutional scholars. Let them talk and let others listen to the different opinions. And I found that was almost impossible to organize. Not almost, it was impossible. People refused to sit with each other. And eventually what I did is I don't know, how do you translate Havan Chakma? I do not know. I found a way to kind of trick the system in a way, to circumvent the problem by organizing groups of students and inviting the professors to speak with students. And professors always agree to speak with students, even when the professors would not speak to each other. So creating a bridge by means somewhat dishonest, I might say, but I thought it was important enough. And I found just bringing people to talk about this, I thought was hugely, hugely important. Now, you wanted to do this on a national level.
Right.
You brought together people to discuss. Now, without going into the details of what laws or legal reforms were discussed, can you speak a little about what are the basic agreements that people can come to in order to have this discussion?
Yeah. So, first of all, I think it's not a coincidence that Rabin's assassination came up. At least from my own experience, there's a straight line between what happened 30 years ago when half of the country, my camp, tried to stick to the other camp, with huge constitutional and political changes that the other camp did not want. My camp ignored the protesters. There were huge protests back then. Ignored it, and it insisted on continuing with its original plan. We were on a slippery slope towards civil war that was eventually stopped by 3 bullets of Yigal Amir. And so, fast forward 30 years later, we see the revenge. We see the camp that 30 years ago was the victim is now trying to stick to the other camp. Huge political and constitutional changes without that camp, and ignoring that camp protest. And we basically came to end this cycle of violence, right? And to not live through this again. So the fourth quarter is the largest grassroots now in Israel. It's 120,000 people. If you want to put in a scale, compared to the United States, multiplied by 40, it's a lot. And I'm thinking maybe we should show it. What do you think? It's
The
5 minutes?
I think enough the
No?
movie.
Yeah, just to show the process, or do you want
I think you can discuss that,
Okay.
but if you go over the 5 innovations, that would be
to?
helpful.
Okay. So basically, this team met. We, as I told you, we had an Israeli experience in the sense that we met with dozens of people, and our basic original point was that on the one hand, in Israel you have, I don't know why it keeps reading by itself, but we have one of the strongest judicial system and we have one of the strongest government. I'm not doing anything. Someone here took over my computer. And we found that there are sparks of truth on both sides. This is a huge concession for both sides to make. To understand that there are sparks of truth, and every word here was kind of calculated. We're talking about sparks of truth. No one was willing to give the other side more than just sparks of truth. And we're here to stop a civil war and think about a regime, constitutional regime behind the veil of ignorance. This is our veil of ignorance. And these are the entities that we've met. And because the politics is broken, basically politicians in Israel, and I think here as well, maybe everywhere, maybe it's a global thing, are like gladiators. They're fighting each other for the likes of the base, not caring what happens with the country. So we're trying to bypass politicians and offer breakthrough through the people. We want the people to demand politicians to agree on change, and it's not a middle ground. It's a new way. And when we started, we asked a few scholars, and you don't know them, but they're kind of nicely diverse group of scholars. We asked them to support us, and they agreed. And I'll show you what happened now. And I'm just going to give you kind of 20,000 feet overview of what we did, just the principles. I'm not going to go into the details unless you ask me the Q&A. We have 5 innovations. One is to move out of beyond the zero-sum game. So what you see here is that because it's the parliamentary system, the Knesset, the parliament, is controlled by the government. So we have 2 powers. And one thing that we do in our program is to restore the parliament to its original theoretical role as a third, overtook my computer here, to strengthen the Knesset so that we have a real separation of powers with 3 different institutions controlling each other. So that's one thing that we did here. And the other innovation is that we installed many mechanisms that will almost force politicians to reach cross-camp agreements. So no longer winner takes it all, but cross-camp agreement. Then we realized that it's because it's a polarized era now. It's very hard to reach an agreement. A lot of suspicious people don't trust each other's good faith. By the way, the 11th creed in the fourth quarter, the 11th commandment in the fourth quarter is assume the other party has good intentions. And if you ask me, this is a very hard commandment. It's very hard. You know what otherwise is considered to be the hardest commandment? It's the 10th commandment. It's respect your father and mother. That's considered to be the hardest one. It's the only one that has a reward in it. If you do that, you live longer. It has a reward because it's so hard. Assume that the other camp has good intentions is much harder. Believe me, I've tried both. I try to respect my parents, and I try to have a demented mother. It's hard, and I try to assume the other camp has good intention. It's much harder. Okay. And so because it's so hard, we do it in 3 steps. We agree on everything in advance. I'll show you, but in the immediate step, and we won't go into the details, we lay basic rules to restore some equilibrium of separation of powers. In the next elections, we want to strengthen the Knesset and change a little bit the election system. And then 2 years later, complete the Bill of Rights and weaken the Supreme Court. So both sides have their dreams. The liberal side would like to see full-blown Bill of Rights. The right wing will want to see a weaker Supreme Court. We do that after we make sure that the system is stable. The innovation number 4 is that everything is agreed on in advance. So nothing is hidden. You know what stages are, but you don't get your dreams now. That's why we were stuck for a year, because everybody wanted their dream now and we're not willing to compromise. We separated it, we did it gradually, but you agree on everything in advance. And the most interesting innovation, the one that I'll talk soon about, is we introduced participatory democracy. What you see here is one of many events where hundreds of people there are 200 people here, those are not round tables, those are square tables, discussing the 45 pages wide document. We made a 15 pages version for those events because we give them 20 minutes to read it. I mean, we give them a lecture, we show them some presentations, and then they have 20 minutes to read it. You see them reading, you see it here, people that are religious and secular, if you identify them by their clothing. And they discuss it, they argue, they talk about their fears, and they give us comments. Okay, I'll talk about that, but these are the 5 innovations, and we're not going to zoom here.
Yeah. So, 2 things I'd like to focus on. Before you go, I'd like to hear more about the participatory democracy and how this can be facilitated, because the meeting of individuals seems to me a very, very powerful thing, something lasting beyond the content of the agreement. So I want to talk about process. But it's very important for me to stress 2 things that you mentioned. One is the agreement in advance, which, because we didn't go into the details, I don't know how clear it is to everyone listening, but there's a basic idea of political philosophy that most law students are introduced to, that if you try to make an agreement about process, it is always going to be colored by the question of who is going to use that process to their benefit. And therefore, if I come to you and I say, let's reach a decision in a certain way, a lot of people will say no, because if we do that way, you happen to have a majority right now, and you'll use it basically to get the content that you're looking for. And people are very afraid of procedural changes, and I think rightly so. So the idea of deciding now about a process that will be gradual, but will be cemented. We will know exactly how the process is going to change over time, even though we don't know who will have power at that stage. That is a very, very important thing for us to actually discuss procedures that we can agree that are fair, even though we don't know if they will operate to our benefit or to our detriment. And you mentioned the veil of ignorance. So those who are familiar with John Rawls and the procedural justice argument might recognize that in there. Myself, I teach game theory, so a lot of it is about understanding how the rules of the game can be manipulated and how the rules of the game are used to create something that I want under the guise of a procedure that sounds fair or under words that sound fair. And at a time of mistrust, this is very difficult. And then I want to connect to something else that you said, which is this 11th commandment, or the alternative that you mentioned. Not just assume the other side means well, which I think is difficult and many people would say unrealistic. Not just unrealistic that I can assume it, I think a lot of people do not think the other side means well. And if there is one thing that both sides can agree on, is that the other side does not mean well. It's very difficult to get out of that situation. And I had something similar in the project that I was doing, which was much smaller, but I was focused on how do we listen to someone else and seek the kernel of truth, you called it sparks of truth, in their argument, and the focus on respect. And I had a student basically shout at me in class, and this is something very out of the ordinary, and especially for this student. And she was offended by my asking her to listen to this other side with respect, and basically saying, I am fighting them tooth and nail. I'm going to demonstrations. I am bleeding from being injured by policemen in demonstrations, and you ask me to respect them? How can I respect them? They're out to destroy everything I love. And the short version of my answer was thanking her for being here, because she's exactly the audience that I need involved. First of all, to keep me honest, but also, if we're going to make a change, this is where we're starting from. Long story short, the end was she told me months later that she still goes to demonstrations every single time. But now she goes and talks to counter-protesters, which is something she had never thought of even coming close. And seeing how these people have some reasonable points, and even if they're totally wrong, they are people that she can converse with. And that is the huge change that I'd like to hear more about in your circles. How do you create a situation that people who are so offended by the other person's position, how can they sit together, and definitely how can they respect the other?
Yeah, so what we do in these events, we ask people, the various stages. Here you see the non-round table stage, but the round tables are kind of behind them. We ask people to introduce themselves to the person next to them, and for a few minutes talk about their fears from Israel. So we'll hear the people from the left saying, I'm worried that you're going to make it a Jewish religious state, and I'm worried that women will not be able to vote or walk in the streets freely, and all sorts of fears that somehow were developed on the left camp. And then you hear people on the right saying, I'm worried that you're going to forbid me going in Tel Aviv with my yarmulke on my head. And I'm worried that you will pass a law that I won't be able to have to fill in. It's like something men put in the morning. And you hear that and you say, wow, it's so funny how both sides have such weird, unrealistic fears from each other. And both sides are sure that if that the other side is going to take over the country, it's going to be a disaster for themselves. And they are also convinced that if they were to rule the country, this will be so great for everyone. And you start realizing how similar we are in our stupid fears, but also stupid fantasies. And then after they do that, we give them a presentation about the details of the constitutional solution that we came up with. And this is like a 4 or 5 hours event. It's a lot of efforts. People come 4 p.m. in the afternoon, they sit until 9 p.m. They invest a lot of effort to do that, and they do it in their thousands. And at the end, we ask them, do you feel that this document replies to soothe your fears? Do you still feel that, if we all agree? And most people feel that, I'm more relaxed now. I'm more relaxed for 2 reasons. A, because they think the document, as far as they can understand it, is good. But also because they met with people that they thought their fears about me are so stupid and unrealistic, and they saw that the reaction of the other side to their fears was very similar, and something there suddenly softened to people in the other camp. So what do we do? What is our secret? We have all sorts of activities. We have those which we call regional event, where few hundred people come, sit for 5 hours, and they study this document like Jews have studied Gemara page Gemara for centuries. And they give us comments, and I'll share the stats. We've got so far, it's only been 2 months, we've got 2,000 comments. A week or two ago, we published an interim report. These are 2,000 comments, but are not 2,000 distinct comments. There are maybe 50 comments really that people are worried about. So we take them seriously. Last week we published an interim report replying to many of those comments, and there were 3 types of replies. Great idea, we're going to put it in our document. Here's why it's not a good idea, we're not going to put it. And this one, we need to think more. And we are doing a lot of thinking more about many of the comments we got from the public. I came very skeptic about participatory democracy. I thought that people are not as smart as law professors, and therefore it's a waste of time. And I discovered that maybe it's the opposite. Law professors are just so dogmatic about everything they know. And
Only when they think they're right.
right. I got messages from. Okay, so someone traced me because I went with his brother to first grade.
Okay.
First grade for me was many years ago. And I get a message saying, "Hey, I'm this guy's brother. You went with him to first grade. I allow myself to text you directly." And he's a construction engineer. He builds buildings.
Okay.
And his comments were so bright. And I told him, I wish I knew about buildings half from what you know about how to design law. So people are very smart. They're not dogmatic. Much easier for them to think outside of the box because they have no box. Unlike law professors, they have no box. So they just think creatively. And we got not tons, but many very good ideas. So this is a regional event. You saw that before. What else we have? We have living room meetings, like I told before. So in the regional event, we come and we present it in this big screen. We present the plan, the 3 stages plan. Then you have living room events where we don't show up because there's so many of them. There are Zoom meetings. And then so far, 2,000 people have downloaded the documents besides, receiving it in those events. We have 500 people who gave us 4,000 comments, and 400 volunteered to continue inviting people to their living room and spreading the word. So it's amazing. I never thought anything like that is possible. The video is unavailable. I'm going to show you something. We'll see in a second if it's possible. We free wrote on a legal conference in one of the colleges in Israel, and we invited 2 scholars, law professors from the very right wing, and 2 scholars from the very left wing, people that will never talk to each other. If at all, they throw mud at each other on social media. And we brought them together. I had a 1-minute clip that I wanted to show you about what happened there, and I wonder if it's gonna work. No, it's not Elon Musk. It's not.
Okay, so let's wait with that. If
Yeah.
you can, in the meantime, what I'd like to do is to
Oh, here it is. Oh, sure.
Get it?
Yeah.
Let's listen.
It's a 1-minute clip. So you don't know these figures. These are very, very famous figures in Israel on both camps. So Frank, yeah. Anyway. So, never mind.
It's censorship.
Yeah. Let me just finish. Show you what we're doing now. Now we're going public. So we're done with the fourth quarter's members. It's only 180,000. We want to go bigger. So we have this platform, which we launched last week. And with this platform, we're supposed to be able to let everybody around the world participate. It's like a chat room just for the different chapters of our plan. I don't think we talked about that. So you see it here. It could handle hundreds of participants in one room to discuss just one of 50 different components of our plans. And then they vote, and then there's AI that aggregates their recommendations, and we get it, and we're supposed to respond to it. It's like we're inventing the process as we go. I had no idea what I was getting into. I get my salary from Tel Aviv University, but I spend most of my time replying to comments from the public about this. So this is what we do. And remember, we started with like 8 or 9 legal scholars, and this is where we are now. We have 40 plus legal scholars from the soft left to the soft right in Israel supporting us, thinking that our plan for resolving the constitutional crisis is good enough. And the plan is to have 1 million people in Israel sign up to this plan after they've studied it, and then demand politicians keep voting for your party. We have many parties in Israel. We don't ask them to vote for anyone specific. Keep voting for parties, but demand your parliament members to adopt our plan. That is the theory of social change that we're working with. So basically, that's it.
Beautiful, thank you. Let me collect a few questions, and because there might be several people who want to ask, I'll collect a few of them, and then you can choose what you want to relate to and how.
And just a reminder to read the file.
I will try to repeat the question for the benefit of our listeners over the ether waves. Yes, please. If you could also just your name so we know how to refer and the question.
Name is Joshua, and so the question is, you touched on it just tangentially, but in the era of social media, and you touched on kind of a generational divide as well, and I think it's great the way you're trying to break these barriers down. So my question is, is it, in your estimation, what is it that's lacking? People have said there's a loss of nuance, right? The kind of, especially the social media and the younger generation, that's the idea of nuance has been stripped away. What is it that is changed in our society or is lacking that you think creates this kind of binary oppositional framework? Okay,
So just to repeat for those through the microphone, Joshua was asking about the generational divide and the loss of nuance, and what it is in our society, or what forces in our society have been creating this loss of nuance that is troubling us. Thank you. I'll collect a few of them, because otherwise we'll have a long answer for the first one and we won't get to the second and third. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Shiv, and I wanted to ask you, obviously this started in, I think you said January 2023, and I was wondering, obviously Israel has been through a lot of change in the past 2 years, 7th of October, so many coalition shifts, some parties have left, some parties have joined. But what I wanted to ask was, how has your blueprint for change, how has your strategies changed with the wins in Israel?
Interesting. So Shiv is asking about the changes that Israel underwent in the meantime, both political and social, and of course with other things going on, and how that affected what you were doing in the fourth quarter. What has changed in the way you act relative to how you started out?
That was very similar to my question I was going to ask. I'm Jack. I was also just going to ask, you might seen a lot, again, the changes and all that. There's also been a lot of changes within the Haredi and the Arab public, and trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward with both of them. I'm curious how the Moist Border kind of adapts to that and reacts to it. What's their changes in terms of the Arab population and the Haredi population as well?
Great, thank you. So Jack is expanding basically our purview and saying, aside from the things that we spoke about, how does this relate to the Arab population in Israel and the Haredi population in Israel, and in what way the fourth quarter interacts with those problems?
My name is Lila. I wanted to ask about this concept of looking for good intentions, looking for good intentions in the people you speak with. I think most people believe that what they do comes from good intentions, otherwise why would you do it? I mean, I think some of the world's most horrific atrocities came from good intentions. People believe that they're doing something in the image of God or trying to bring some sort of objective morality into the world. So what's the point in looking for good intentions and people that what you think they're doing is evil?
Wonderful. So Lila is challenging us further. She's saying not only might it be difficult to think about the good intentions of the other side, but is it worthwhile? Since so many bad things in the world, atrocities over history have happened with people professing good intentions, does it really matter if I think of my counterpart as having those or not? Yeah, okay, we'll stop there and then we'll do one more round with your permission. So not too long.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for setting me here. Okay, so there's a lot here. Just start with you. You know, we live in a polarized era where people here in the United States are not willing with their kids to marry kids from other camps. It's a terrible, I think, time to be in that respect. And one of the characteristics of that time is that opinions come in packets. So if you're Democrats, we know what your views about abortion and religion state and a lot of things are kind of, and you're not allowed, like when I was a student, you're not allowed to have more nuanced views where you could maybe have one view about abortions but another view about gay rights. And now it's kind of, tell me what you vote and I'll tell you a list of your 20 views about the world. And this, of course, makes it very hard to reach compromises. And we're trying to break that. We're trying to break that by having people talk to each other, especially talk about their fears. What worries you about me? And we also ask people to imagine what they think the other side is afraid of them, and people totally miss that. They have no clue how fearful the other side is from them, exactly as they are fearful of themselves. So we're trying to make the conversation more emotional and more from the heart, and that's smoothed later on, makes a path to be able to hear your views, totally disagree with them, but believe you have good intention. That goes back, I think, to Ilan. So the 11th commandment of assume the other side has good intention. You know, it's actually a good assumption in the sense that really 80% of the people can agree on 80% of the stuff 80% of the time. I think it's an empirical, correct observation. And it's very easy for us to focus on what divides us, because that's what creates traffic. So connect those two questions. That's what creates traffic, to focus on what divides. And what we agree about is not interesting. People don't get angry. It doesn't create money to social media platforms, so they don't emphasize that. But when you meet with people and you discover the 80%, your heart opens up and you're willing to move from a zero-sum game to a win-win situation. And there are a lot of win-win situations in our plan here.
Just a minute, let me challenge you on that. I want to take what Lila said and push it a little bit further. If I understood Lila correctly, she wasn't saying that people do not necessarily have good intentions. It's that their good intentions could be so harmful because in the name of that good intentions, they are willing to do things that are very, very bad. So assume they have good intentions, but they're still doing something I think is so harmful, so detrimental to all of us. Maybe it doesn't help me to think of that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry I missed your question. I think it's a very good question. We have a Hanukkah children's song. I'm not translating in the fly, so I'm probably gonna kill the song. But anyway, it says, we wanna have the darkness move away from here, and in our hands we have light and fire. That's the children's song that I just killed. In Hebrew, it sounds good, and it rhymes. And basically, I think we should have light and fire. So the fire is to stop evil, to stop a lot of things that the government wanted to do in a very extreme and radical and fast and shocking way is bad, and we should have a fire to stop that. And I continue to go and demonstrate against the government. But on the other hand, there's half of the people, older voters, that again, I assume good intention that people like me have different conceptions of, and to them we have to offer the light. So you have to do both. You have, in my view, that you have to fight the government, which is very radical, but you don't have to fight the voters. There are people, again, in Israel, families stop talking to each other on these grounds. This is absurd. This is just absurd. It's only political views. What defines us as human beings is much more than our political views, and we should focus on the 80%. asked me about changes in the government. So I joined the fourth quarter after all the change. I mean, there was a recent change, but after the change that you probably referred to when the centrist party left the government, I joined late after that. But in any case, the theory of change that we work with is not through the political system. I think the political system is broken. This Knesset is broken, and we're waiting for the next election. New parties will emerge, and we're going to demand the politicians to adopt our plan and encourage the fourth quarter members to do the same. The question about the Haredi and the Arabs. The fourth quarter has a team that came up with a white paper on Haredi Jews in the army. That's the biggest conflict, that they don't go into the army, and as a result, we go much more. We spend more time as a reservist, and that's could be 300 days a year in 2024. It's crazy. So this is a conflict, and the different team that worked in that, they came up with a white paper that was unsuccessful. It preceded ours. We learned from their mistake. They tried to do it through the political system. As I told you, the political system is broken. So we're talking with the people. With respect to Arabs, I recently joined a new team of Jews and Arabs. I told you everything started from a Jews and Arabs seminar where someone came to me and introduced me to the fourth quarter. So that's where my real interest was and still is. So I joined recently a diverse team of Jews and Arabs, and we're doing the same shtick. We're kind of meeting with a lot of people from very right-wing religious rabbis to very left-wing secular Arabs, and we hear about their conceptions of living together, because I think everybody agrees we have no choice but to live together. The question is how. Are we going to continue slaughtering each other, or maybe do something else? So we're trying to do something else, and I'm actually very hopeful because I meet people that I thought would be very frightful to me. Yeah, it's the same process that I'm just saying it now with respect to Arab and Jews, people that are very very right-wing rabbis that always was very afraid of them. I thought they're going to take over me, and I meet with them, and we can agree on 80% of the stuff. So I'm very, very hopeful about us being able to mobilize also something between Arabs and Jews, but time will tell.
Thank you. Let's see if there are a few more comments and questions. This started.
My name is Steve. I was wondering if there's any role, or could you envision a role for Jews in the diaspora in this organization?
So Steve was asking if there's any role for Jews in the diaspora in this organization, and someone else raised his hand. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ben. My name is Ben. I'm a Wano, and I guess this kind of alludes to what was said previously. But I wanted to know: has anyone suggested to you that just with the war still going on, with Hamas not defeated yet, with thousands of people in Israel still displaced from their homes, has anyone ever suggested that this just isn't the time to be having this conversation? How do you respond?
So Ben has basically raised the question.
A rhetorical question.
A strong question, which a lot of people raise and discuss, basically saying that since things are so problematic, hectic, war going on, people displaced, etc., maybe it's not the right time to have these conversations. And I would build on that or go one step further. Might it not be true that having these conversations is a privilege for more peaceful times when the basic problem is this political strife between people? Does it take away focus from other things? And does it kind of hide or mask the other problems if we focus on this one, which is an objection that could be raised?
You said two things which I thought were interesting, and I wonder if you can reflect on. One, you said two law and economics professors are sitting and speak about these issues, and the second is the gap between how you came to this, thinking about the being an expert as a law professor, and participatory democracy and its role in promoting change, that is very hardcore constitutional, or is it?
So Masua is going back to something Ronen mentioned before, that both of us come from the field of law and economics, and it's a little funny us discussing constitutional issues. And I should say, because Masua knows more about these constitutional issues than I think both of us. So has it anything to do with the field, and why so? And I think I missed the second point.
It's related. Like when you said I come as a law professor and they come as people who are completely lay people, and what's the role of professionalism in a sense?
Perfect. And what is the role of professionalism in this respect of law professors coming with a lot of knowledge of the subject versus participatory democracy of having people who are not specialists, but their participation is so important? And in parentheses, being a law and economics scholar, I could add to the question and say, how much of what we do and understanding of how process influences the content, how much of that role can we bring into these issues?
Mhm.
And my own personal interest, how much is the participation, the discussion, how much are the discussions themselves important, bringing people together, versus the result or the content of those discussions as to bring a document or vote about details? That's a very stark divide that I would like to address. Rebecca?
So since you mentioned the connection to the US and sort of the role reversal of which the Catholic first, and we are going through the shock of experience at the moment, I just wonder, so maybe it's even too early to ask, but sort of, do you have insights on sort of how this might play out here, similar model and the area of G, the executive collecting in this space, also with deep distrust, inability to assume the other side or the government has good intentions, and sort of what you really think that there, if you can talk really now.
Great. So Rebecca is bringing us back to something that we alluded to in the beginning of how might these things play out in the American context, both as to the cultural divide and as to the ability to create something similar in the dynamic that you're describing, a similar process here.
Great, thanks. So some of the questions are interrelated, so I'm going to try and respond to them together. And maybe I'll start with you with the what is more important, the mere discussions, meeting people and seeing that they don't have horns coming out of their skulls, the human beings that are afraid just as we are, or the comments that we received from them. We received 2,000 comments a building. I think it's a forum, it's a discussion. I think that to reduce polarization, you have to lower the temperature in society. It's more important to lower the temperature in society than the exact details of the legal proposals that we have. I mean, really, and it goes back to one of your questions, it's not rocket science. Okay, common law, with all respect to common law, it's not rocket science. It's not that it has to be accurate to the millimeter. There are many ways to nominate judges. There are many ways to strike down government rule. I mean, it's not rocket science. There's some degrees of freedom there. And that's why I said it's not a zero-sum game. They're win-win situations, and it goes back to why two law and economics professors are engaged in those discussions and conversations and compromises, because there's a lot of game theory here, and it's hidden. There's a lot of game theory here, and also at D&I never publish common law papers, so we are not committed to any specific solution. We come open-minded. We understand very well the lay of the land. We understand what's at stake. We understand the possibilities, but we don't have an agenda. We understand what democracy is. Like, actually, many people now in Israel, if there's one thing that came out of all this, is that people are very literate in common now. People have views about everything. You know, being Jews and having views is kind of, at least now they know what they're talking about. So, but by far, lowering the temperature through meeting real people is more important than giving us the best comment, you know. And so I talked about why law and econ. Now, what about American jury? What is their role? So, who asked it? You asked it? Yeah. So no, this is an Israeli startup basically in the fourth quarter, which means there are no rules. 5 months ago, no one knew who I am. Now everybody knows because I'm so involved. It's like you pave yourself. What I want to say is that if you want to open the American wing of the fourth quarter, you can do it today. and you can lead it, and I can help you, and it's like everybody does whatever they want to do, and things just happen. It's a bottom up movement. I came from nowhere. Now I have a lot of they don't even post something on Facebook before they consult with me to make sure they don't offend the left, which is great. But I wasn't nominated. I just spent a lot of effort and time in this movement, and that's why I became a key player. You can do the same. In 5 months from now, you could be the American fourth quarter czar. If you just spend time and effort. Now I like your comment about aren't you getting comments that, what are you doing? It's not the time, it's not the right way. You are normalizing the other camp. You're legitimizing the other camp. And my answer to this is how beautiful it is that finally, thanks to us, the left and the right both agree that we are a terrible player that legitimizes the other side. At last, they both agree on something. They agree that we legitimize the other side. That's the only thing they're doing. So when you're attacked from that side and the other side as well, you're probably doing something good. Compared to the United States. It's very hard to believe that they have good intentions. Right? I told you, the 11th commandment is the hardest one. The government has good intention, the people that support the government have good intention. It's very, very hard. And I know, I've been there. And it still has this voice in me, even now, that I've been practicing the 11th commandment. It's still very, very hard. I wake up in the morning and have to kind of meditate on good intentions. It's very, very hard. What I try to do is, as I told you, fire and light, is to try and slow down the government as much as I can, but at the same time offering a hand and the heart to people on the other side that are afraid of you just as you are afraid of them. I promise you that. They're afraid of you just as you are afraid of them. And most of the problems are not zero-sum game. There could be win-win situations. Maybe you need some more line-econ people in America to help you see that. But there are ways out, but you have to meet with the other side and be willing to hear what they worry about. Good luck.
Any more comments or questions?
Yeah, second one.
Of course.
Do you have red lines still?
Yeah, that's another one we keep getting.
Wait, I'd like to make sure because it's an important question. So I was asking if you have red lines, and if I understand correctly, the question is, with all of this focus on compromise and all of this focus on understanding the other side and meeting with the other side, at what point do you draw the line and say this and no further? At what point are you giving up the basis of what you believe in order to have dialogue?
Right, and let me amplify the question, because the fear is that you're so committed to the process and to compromises that you will just slide and slide and slide and end up at the bottom of the slide in a place that you would have never wanted to be in the first place. So I'm so kind of committed to meeting the other side, where I'm going to end up. That's a tough one, and I have two answers. None of them is fully satisfactory, so I have to warn myself not to fall into this dynamic. But here are my two answers that I have. One is that in our team, the team that wrote the plan, what we plan to do is, once we finalize the document, once we finish internalizing the comments that we got from the public, and we seal the document and we start a public campaign of 1 million people signing up to it, what we want to have is a separate document saying, but here are the red lines from the right and from the left. Because we're worried about politicians taking, cut and paste pieces that they like from our plan, and then, but it's not. It's like a mobile in a baby's room with a lot of kind of moving parts. It has to stay, there's the balance and there's an equilibrium, and you cannot just take one because the mobile then collapses. This is how our plan looks like. So we don't want them to pick and choose whatever they want and then say, look, we listen to the public, and no. So we want to have a separate document saying, okay, these are the things that you cannot touch, and if you touch them, it means that you didn't adopt our plan. That's one answer, but we didn't do it. We just stopped about doing it. The other answer I think is more interesting. I'm not sure we really need red lines, because red lines are when you deal with the politicians, but when you deal with the other camp, you discover that there's so much in common. I'm from the left, right? The right wing cares about democracy. They care about human rights. They care about equality. They care about freedom of speech. They care about other things that I thought they don't care about. So really, my red lines are like their red lines. I'm talking about the people, not the politicians. These are gladiators. They're not serving us. They're serving themselves. But when you meet with people, you see that my red lines are like their red lines. I don't want to take their yarmulke off their heads, and they don't want to put a yarmulke on my head. It's just not what we want of each other. So when you meet with people, it's clear that the concept of red lines is not as pronounced as we think it is. So these are my two answers. I know they're not fully satisfactory, but at least that's what I currently think.
Rebecca, you wanting to add something?
Yeah.
There's also one there.
Is there somebody else as well?
It's just me.
Okay.
It's
So
not
I'll- and
just.
then you ask. So there's a very clear distinction you're making between those in power and people who are sort of, whether they're on the left or the right or somewhere in between, who are, have to show up also to be part of this lunch or the liberation. But are people in power listening? And I guess the question is that it's the same here or in Israel, sort of, have you moved the needle? I mean, you can wait for next election, but we also know how long Netanyahu has gained power. I mean, I think these are questions like, are people in power listening to where, when you distinguish, does it stay sort of an idea to people that doesn't get implemented?
Let's get the second one and then I'll say
The third one too.
I think it's very much along the lines of what Rebecca was saying, was just, you've talked a lot about this dynamic of, we're not talking about politicians, we're talking about people. But in the United States anyway, the politicians are very much using those divisions on purpose. And so you're asking people to come together and then engage in a political process that actually thrives on them not coming together.
Right.
And that's what we went into here so strongly, is like both sides are saying, this is an emergency and people are panicking and they're giving money and, they see that each other. So I just wondered about the durability of these connections that you're making when so much money and time is being spent to get people back to prayer again. Like how long do those connections last from those conversations when they go home and watch your version of Fox News or whatever, and then being told the other people are eating your children?
No.
That's the kind of stuff that we went into here anyway.
Right.
Yeah, and your name just a second.
Oh, Arnie, sorry.
So Arnie and Rebecca were both coming together about the question of what you stated as the difference or the distinction between speaking to people and affecting politicians. And I think what was common in the theme of the question is how useful or how effective is it really when eventually the people making the decisions are politicians, and these politicians are working pretty hard in order to keep people divided. I would like to add to that maybe a contrary view. Since what we're focusing on is listening, and since what we're focusing on is respect for the other side, isn't it too easy to demonize the politicians and to speak of them as the bad people that we need to move beyond? Firstly, because a lot of these politicians are people, turns out, and some of them are actually people who really care a lot and try to do something and are then trying to move into the system and make a change and find themselves being demonized. And secondly, when we have these politicians then who are affected by the divide and they have to fight for market power in a market that is benefited by division, of dividing, of describing the other as so far away. So aren't the politicians in a way victims of this same system, that they have to do this, otherwise they'll be just thrown into the basket of ineffective people who cannot make a real change?
Yeah. So I think your question is kind of the answer to you, which is, if I have to blame one entity, I'll blame social media. I think social media, the algorithm incentivizes polarization, and politicians have to play by the rules of the game. But again, even with effective politicians, I agree with you, 80% of them are people like us. It's the 20% that are very loud and extreme that drive the attention. They have economic and political reasons to behave like that. And look, in Israel, because it's a small country, the fourth quarter, I think they have like maybe 50 activities a week that you can sign up to, from helping farmers near Gaza pick up their apples, to renovating houses in the northern border with Lebanon that were bombarded by Hezbollah. So lawyers and accountants and teachers and bus drivers, and they all go and they paint apartments together and they plant trees together. So there are like 50 different activities that you can sign up every week to do something, no matter what, with people that are not like you. They're not in your echo chamber. They don't vote to the same party that you vote. And just by picking apples with people that don't look like me and have different views, something happens. So that's actually is organized by the fourth quarter. They say we want people to meet to do no matter what. And again, it's not bottom up, it's not top down. It's not that the chair of the. It's just people say, okay, I'm going to organize picking up apples, and he puts up this platform, and people sign up to, and boom, it happens under the auspice of the fourth quarter. But it's all bottom up. So if you're innovative, you can do that. Are politicians listening? Again, I think 80% of them are, and it's easier. It's easier, I think, the more the perspective you have is local, municipal, state. Once you go to the federal level here in the United States, it's harder. I mean, you have congressmen and women, which we don't have this direct relationship between the elected Knesset members and the citizens like you have here, even at the federal level. So in a way, here it's even easier than the United States, even though it's a much bigger country. But it's hard, and the economic incentives of social media are there. So it's an uphill battle, and the only way to gain victory, I think, is to remember there are real life out there and get out of your echo chambers and chat rooms and do something real and see real people. I don't know any other way.
We need to finish up. I always like to end with homework. I really believe that it's very easy to sit and talk and discuss, especially with open-minded people, and come out and feel better. But at the end of the day, we're very quickly drawn back into our own tendencies and habits and our ways of looking at people. And when you were speaking about the meetings, I was thinking of homework I sometimes give to my students about political divisiveness. And I would like to focus on two things. Many people are familiar with the confirmation bias. Basically, human beings like to be right. And if you give me any way of convincing myself that I am right, I will use it. And if you don't give me a way, I will manufacture one and I will still believe that I am right. And this operates very strongly when there is the ability for interpretation. So when you have vague terms, general terms, people will very easily interpret themselves as the good guy, and often that means looking at someone else as the bad guy, which causes me to have one, call it piece of homework, which is which of my opinions or which of the ways in which I describe the world are because it makes me feel more comfortable, because this way I get to feel like the good guy, and how much of that should I be challenging myself on? And I think that's a practice that needs to be developed. And another thing is, since you spoke so much about listening to the other side and the sparks of truth that they might have, is when you're thinking of someone on the other side or someone who is stating an opinion that you find wildly wrong or offensive, how might I rephrase his argument so that someone reasonable might actually think that way? I think you focus on social media. I would say it's even beyond that. We have a tendency to look at others of differing opinion and very easily thinking of them as evil, stupid, unreasonable, something I can just dismiss. But if I force myself for every one of those opinions to say to myself, wait a minute, what if that was my brother, or worse, what if it was my son or daughter? who had that opinion and voted that way and wanted to do this, what might they say in order to justify their opinion that I could listen to and say, you know what, you're wrong, but you have a point, or at least I can respect the way you're thinking. And again, I think it's a practice that we need to repeat a lot in order to battle this tendency that we have of lumping people into bad groups and then dismissing them as something that I just don't want to think about too much. In other words, let's make life as hard for ourselves as possible. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Rebecca and the Diller Institute. I think it was a wonderful occasion, and thank you for all the hard work that you did.
You got it.